Hey there, my name's Jordan, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show. In this episode, you are going to hear from one of my friends and someone who helped bring me into the resource generation community, Natalie Houchins. Natalie is born and raised in Austin and has had her own grapplings with coming into her own wealth and class privilege that she'll share a little bit more in the episode. And we'll get right into it. All right, welcome, Natalie. Natalie is one of my friends and folks in my resource generation community in Austin. And Natalie, for guests on the show, I generally ask them to start with sharing their money story. So just how money has moved through your life. I know you're really familiar with this, but for listeners who are just now hearing the word money story for the first time, it's how money has moved through your life and the systemic forces that have shaped and influenced your own lived experience. So as much or as little as you like to share, Natalie, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and share your money story.
Hello, it's so lovely to be here, Jordan. I'm so excited to be here and hang out with you, talk about this subject that people do not want to talk about or are not encouraged to talk about. So, hello, listeners. I'm Natalie Houchins, she, her. I'm from Austin, born and raised, which is essentially how I would like to frame my money story. Every time I tell this, I feel like it changes and feels confusing to me as I'm telling it, just because there's not a super straight line between wealth and me. There wasn't like some family industry or, my great grandfather didn't invent the toaster strudel or whatever type thing. I like to frame it as the story of Austin's gentrification and growth is how money has moved through my life and why I felt called to this work. So I'll tell the story sort of backwards and a little bit out of order to get back to the present day. I joined Resource Generation, which is a national chapter-based organization that organizes young people with access to wealth, both wealth and privilege, which was a big part of it for me, like class privilege, educational privilege, and works to redistribute wealth, land, and power from their members to various organizations with a focus on grassroots and redistribution to individuals. I joined Resource Generation in 2019 after a friend who comes from a lot of wealth just told me about it. She told me about her journey with it and joining the organization. And at first I was like, okay, that's great. You have a trust fund. So happy for you. And then I looked into it because I was curious and I took the little quiz. And it turns out that if you don't have student debt, you are automatically wealthy as compared to the vast majority of people. And at that point, I did not have student debt. And I didn't have student debt because in the first place, my parents took it on for me, which, so that was never going to be on me necessarily, but they were able to pay off my student debt because they sold their home in the Bolden Creek neighborhood of Austin, which is now very fancy. When I was growing up, it was not fancy. We moved there in 1996 after my dad lost his job. It was like this is the neighborhood we can afford thing. And then we essentially gentrified the neighborhood by being there. We were the first, I think we were the first white family on that block. We moved this big Victorian house from this parking lot of this iconic Mexican food, like Tex-Mex place on South Congress. And we plopped it onto this lot in Bolton Creek. And all of that was still less than $200,000. I think it was even less than $150,000 in 1996. But over the course of the 20 years that my parents lived there, that house appreciated 10 times. And my parents sold it in 2017, I think, they bought it for like 130,000 all told with all the renovations and everything. And then they sold it for 1.7 million. Because of that, they were able to pay off my student debt, my brother's student debt, all of their accumulated debt from being self-employed over my whole life. And just they were able to buy a new house in cash, just like completely set themselves up for the rest of their lives, which was kind of not the case. That was not something that I had anticipated growing up. So in my childhood, my parents were self-employed. My mom is a therapist. My dad is a attorney and with his own practice. He also like imports beer and tequila and now owns a Belgian beer bar. Their income fluctuated a lot year to year, and things felt actually pretty uncertain sometimes. Because of my parents' self-employment, income was variable year to year, and there were times, especially when I was really young, that things felt really hard. I didn't have new clothes for the first, 10 years of my life or something. But because my parents both had terminal degrees and my dad was able to get himself back on his feet after losing his job and my mom's practice took off, they were able to hold on to the house for those 20 years while the market did its thing, because Austin was growing at a incredibly rapid pace during that time. I think it was the fastest growing city in the country for I don't want to say anything totally untrue, but it felt like for 10 years in a row. Like people were moving to Austin in droves. The tech industry was booming. And that neighborhood in particular used to be considered South Austin and now is like very much Central Austin. It's very close to downtown. And so that house just appreciated in value so much every year, as did the property taxes, of course, because we are in Texas. And my parents, because their income, even though it fluctuated, the general trend was that it got to be bigger over the course of that time. They were able to hold on to the house despite the rising property taxes. Whereas the other people on the block, who were entirely people of color when I moved there, they slowly moved away over the course of my childhood. And that always stuck with me. I always felt a sense of something is not right about this. I don't understand what's not right about it because I'm, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, but I knew that them moving away was not a choice that they made. I knew that them moving away was because of forces sort of outside of their and my control. It felt like something was being enacted upon the neighborhood. I didn't understand entirely my family's place in it, but I did know that things were getting more expensive and that those families were being replaced with a certain kind of person. And those people were young families mostly. And whatever the acronym YUPPY stands for, I always forget. I was trying to remember and I can't remember. But that's what called me to this work ultimately. But then once I started looking into it, looking back before my immediate family story, I already knew this, but I was made more aware of enslavers on both sides of my family. Just thinking about the family myths that we're told about, like, we came from England with nothing, and somehow they got land, and somehow they made it to Texas. And well, of course, that land that they were able to buy for cheap they were only able to buy for cheap in Kansas because the government stole it from indigenous people. And then, of course, the land that they had in North Carolina was worked by enslaved labor. So this work has really allowed me to, uh, even though there's not some like, oh, I come from cotton money and there's a straight line between like slave labor and my family's like enormous wealth, I've been able to see more clearly how my family has been kept afloat by these various systems that exist. And then skipping over some things, fast forward to me now, I myself, after some time pursuing the arts, now have a job in tech where I make $150K a year. I started at, I think, $55,000 a year in tech and have grown a lot in the last 6 years. I am without student debt, and I am actually now without personal debt either. And I don't own a house, but that high salary, I was able to obtain that through my degree that I was encouraged to get by my parents, who were always willing to take on that debt for me. I went to Northwestern. I learned all about how to be part of the upper classes of America while there, even though there was a wealth disparity between most of my classmates and me. I learned how to be part of that. I learned how to talk the talk, kind of, and was able to, despite no no aspirations to be in tech or real experience in it, I felt like fumble my way into that career. And because I already had this familiarity with that world. So yeah, I think that is my very winding money story. Ultimately, the story of the growth of Austin's wealth and tech industry is pretty much in parallel with my own story about how money has flowed through my life.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all of that. I mean, I'm even hearing in your story like so many systemic factors, like the genocide that our government enacted on Indigenous people, still is enacting on Indigenous people, even with our tax dollars today in Palestine, and the displacement, like the complicity of being someone that's living in this time where there's so many systemic forces that are shaping so many injustices in our world. And when we don't plan with preserving deep affordability, what can happen and what has happened. And a lot of your story kind of in some ways like relates to my own, especially moving into tech in the educational privilege part. My parents also covered my costs of education and also my costs of housing when I was going to school. I also didn't really think of myself as someone with wealth until I started to get more politicized around this. So I'm curious, what was it like for you coming into these spaces where it's like, oh, this person has a trust fund, this person comes from like a big industry family? How was it coming into the resource generation community within the varying degrees of wealth and access, especially as someone who didn't grow up with the perspective of being a wealthy person necessarily, or just because I think a lot of times I try to compare it to like the people that qualify for the Boston Marathon and the people like running a 5K for the first time. Like we're all doing the thing. We all fall into this group that are runners, but our paces are really different. Our speeds are really different. The way we think about things and the people we associate ourselves with can even be quite different, even though we all make up the top 10%. So I'm just curious, like how you relate to that and what it has been like coming in as someone who maybe thought of themselves as more middle class and then kind of got politicized throughout your own journey.
That is such a good analogy. I'm going to steal that. I've been trying to find one, and that's a great one. It was honestly, um, it was hard because at that time when I joined, I was actually in a fair amount of personal debt. And I was making more than I never made in my life. I went from bartending and making like maybe 25K a year to making 55K a year. But, I didn't have a savings account. I didn't have really anything. I just knew that I was now in tech and I didn't have student debt and that I, I knew that my life had changed. So I felt this very like strange, it was a very like pre-feeling, like pre-wealth feeling, whereas the people that I was talking to in resource generation definitely had more of a familiarity with wealth. They just had more like of a visceral understanding of that feeling of not worrying about money. I mean, they did worry about money. It was just in a different way. So it was hard sometimes to feel like I belonged. I had to keep reminding myself that the difference between us and basically everyone else is that we have varying degrees of more than enough and are okay. Like that's the thing that we had in common was the most important thing. For me, it was day to day. I felt still very stressed about, paying for healthcare and like if my car broke down, but I knew that I had family support and I knew that my earning potential was like exponential if I just stayed in this industry long enough. And now I feel much more at ease in these spaces now that my salary has gone up and I've gained a more clear understanding of what having more than enough really means relative to the vast majority of people, not only in this country, but in the world. But it was hard to come in with the very real experiences I had as a kid when I did not feel like we had enough. And there were some like situations that I was in that were very much related to us not having, you know, money for childcare, that felt safe. I did a lot of like public city run like camps that were pretty shady. Had some pretty weird experiences and felt um I felt that. So like it lives in me, some of those like somatic experiences of not feeling safe because I knew that my family didn't have money to keep me out of those situations, especially during the summer. So I was bringing those experiences in, but also like coming to terms with the fact that there's I have more than enough now, and I even had enough then.
What I'm really hearing you kind of like bring into this is like the push pull of, I'm not sure if you would use these words, but almost like ascending classes like over the course of your life. That's something that I experience as well. And so I remember the times of the stress, the fear, the somatic experiences that live in my body. And it still makes me have my own set of fears for like, what about the future and the uncertainty? And then the fact that I live in now is like, I actually, the privilege that I have makes it so that I have that safety net to fall back on. But it's like, well, what if that stops being true at some point? So that's what it's bringing up for me. And I think it's also true that there is a level of, there's no amount of money that will ever keep you, that will keep anyone permanently safe. So you're weaving that in as well. And I know as you started to get more involved in resource generation, informed your own redistribution. What was it like to start redistributing wealth? If you think about like where you started and where you're at now, like what was that process and where did you find yourself being challenged?
Wow, like what was I doing in 2019? Where was I giving and how was I giving? The process was it was hard. The aforementioned the personal debt that I was in made it hard to feel like I was making an impact with my giving. I think I was started with like, it's always been a percentage based thing for me. It's been like it changes, but 10% of my take home of each paycheck is how I framed it. Honestly, that might have started during the pandemic. So I think that's when things escalated more for me is giving wise. It in general has sort of operated under a percentage based system. And so when I was first starting, that felt really hard. And I don't think I hit the 10% at that point. It was hard because I day to day did not really have a lot of extra money and I was in debt. So I won't even go into financial literacy and learning all of that and ADHD. Those are like three other journeys that I could talk about. So redistribution at first, it felt like a muscle that I was exercising, not like something I was actually doing. It didn't feel like I was really helping anyone or like I was making an impact. I was very much comparing myself to the other people in our chapter who had, long-term relationships with organizations and individuals and more experience with giving away larger amounts of money. They had larger amounts of money to give away. But there was something about working that muscle that kind of selfishly, it felt good just to do it. I just sort of stuck with it. There was something about being in community with other people and just having this be a part of my life that even though I was not giving away enough money to feel like I had an impact, the act of giving away and not giving away in a charitable way, but like redistributing what I have, it felt, I don't know. And I honestly don't know if I could articulate what it felt like at that point. It just felt necessary. It just felt like something I needed to do. And I'm so glad that I stuck with it because as my income went up and I was able to pay off my debt, I was able to have savings, I've been able to escalate that redistribution. And now I can feel that muscle getting stronger. And even though actually the secret is that you'll never feel like you're having an impact, you're never going to feel, I mean, well, certainly at times, but that's not the reason why you do it. It's not so that someone comes back to you and says like, oh, thank you so much for that money. It was like, life changing and you've changed everything. You fixed capitalism because that's the problem that we live in a system. It's not really about what me as an individual can do. It's about growing this practice and dismantling the systems in your own life so that you feel like you're living a more honest, connected life with other people. And so that your wealth is not just in money or not even primarily in money. To summarize, it was difficult at first, but I think just sticking with the process of redistribution has had an enormous effect on my identity and my ability to separate money from safety, even as my income has gone up and I have been like I say this like, oh, and I've fixed it in myself. I now just me and my identity and my ego and money are not connected at all. They've become more connected as my income has gone up. I have become more attached to having more money, especially because I grew up having to worry about money. I've certainly gotten used to it, and my ego and my identity have gotten more involved in the money. But because I, alongside that, have continued to exercise the muscle of redistribution and not feeling emotionally attached to spending money like on other people or giving it away in moments, I feel like I've been able to at least partially successfully stand up to those impulses and not lose track of them in myself, because it will happen. The more money you have, it is very difficult to not feel attached to it. But if you remain aware of that, it becomes much less likely that you will hoard that wealth. You can resist hoarding wealth if you already have systems in place in your own life with redistribution and with understanding that safety does not come from having a certain amount of money in your bank account.
Yes. Like major snaps over here. I think so many people think of redistribution, or they might call it giving, or like charitable donation. But think of it as like a one way, like I'm going to put this money out in the universe and it's never going to come back. And I really don't think that that's true. I think if we all practice this, if this was all a muscle that just society was like, this is what we do, that money comes back. It comes back when we're in need. And yeah, I think what's so special about kind of the group that we're a part of is that there's a degree of personal transformation. And I think that's really, it's not about, like you said, the virtuous or like, I'm a good person if I do this, but it's about, oh, my worldview has shifted and how I think about safety has shifted. And also how I relate to like the own systemic injustices happening in the world and my level of complicity in them has shifted as well in a way that allows me to both own that part of me and also strive for something different. I hear a lot of that, and thank you. So I'm curious now, especially there are listeners here who are in debt or trying to navigate through debt. So I'm especially curious this question of like, how much is enough? Or how do you think about how much is enough? My belief, and I'm here to be challenged, but my belief is that there's no like enough number that's true for everyone, or that, well, if you have a family with 3 dependents, this should be your enough number. Like, I don't think that that's true. I think it's a really personal range of enough-ness. So for you, like, how do you orient to that kind of like unanswerable question that we can still root ourselves towards?
Course. That is the, as they say, $1,000,000 question. It is something I grapple with. It is the thing that I grapple with all the time. Honestly, this is the part where my childhood experiences have really helped me, is that throughout my life, there have been so many situations where I've had so much less than I have now, and yet I've had enough. I have been okay. I have not died. I have been able to have a joyful, pleasurable, connected life. So when I'm feeling some anxiety around giving or redistributing, just remembering good times when I've had so much less than I do and yet was able to make it work every single time is how I orient to having enough, and remembering that my resourcefulness and my relationships will always be more real than any amount of money. But I will say that something that kind of clicked into place for me with this work was when I first started, I had this idea that I had to give everything away and like sort of empty myself of money and time and energy, that was the only way that I would be able to make proper reparations or be a good person in this work. And something that really clicked into place for me was at my previous company, I sold a bunch of stocks, and I was like, okay, do I pay off my debt or do I give this money away? I really grappled with that because it was a lot of money, and I decided to pay off my debt because I knew that this would just keep following me around forever, and I would feel conflicted every time I gave money away if I did not just pay off this debt and take care of myself in that moment. Something clicked for me about like, you trust yourself that you know when it is time to take care of you and when it is time to give away. Both giving away should feel a little bit hard. It should like escalating, like redistributing to the point of discomfort is how it works, but redistributing to the point of harming yourself is not it. And at that point, my interest was building. It was just going to follow me around forever. Finding the balance of taking care of myself while still redistributing to the point of discomfort and challenge is the right amount of tension that I feel at the center is where I feel like I have enough. There's no magic number. There's no magic situation. There's not like, oh, I'll buy a house and then I'll have enough, or I'll pay off my car and then I'll have enough. It's more finding a feeling of trust in yourself that I will take care of myself. I will put my own oxygen mask on. And so that I can redistribute to the point of discomfort, that I can give away a little bit more than I think I can. That's only possible if you don't burn yourself out financially and also energetically, emotionally, psychologically, all of that. So for me, that tension that's never settled, it should never be settled around like what is enough. But keeping that tension alive between those two things is where enough feels like to me.
It's reminding me of this framework that comes from like Al-Anon and NA of moving from a comfort zone to a challenge zone, but not moving immediately to an overwhelm zone. So how do we stay in that challenge zone? We're uncomfortable. It's not fun. But we're also growing in the process without completely overloading our nervous system with like, we're in danger. And now we've self-sacrificed to the extent that we are now maybe not able to sustain ourselves. And that feels really applicable to me in so many aspects of my life. And the other thing that I wanted to keep like weaving through that you really touched on is like, we are so resourceful. It's easy to imagine that something will happen and we'll be destitute because there's so much things in the world that we don't have power over or control over. And yet, just like you mentioned, there are so many people who are getting by. Working class and poor people are known to share more resources than wealthy people. And so it's like, right, they know how to take care of themselves. And even if we have less financial wealth, there are models that exist. So I really like that you touched on that. Yeah, I think this is a question that comes up often in clients that I talk to and people entering redistribution work. How did you land on a percentage, or like, how did you land on a number?
Such a good question. It actually originally came from my first therapist that I had in college. I don't even remember what the context was, but she was talking about what she does with her money. I honestly truly have no idea how this came up. I think it must have been during the election, the 2012 presidential election, different era. But she was talking about how she gives away 10% of her income. And she was saying like where she gives that away. And so that number always stuck with me. Then I think honestly, just kind of trial and error, like trying on, okay, what is 10% of my take home pay? Like, what does that feel like? And kind of leveling out to like basically starting with that number and then seeing, okay, how does this feel? Am I in the overwhelm zone or am I in the discomfort but learning zone with that? So yeah, starting with that number, but then playing with like numbers around that to see where landing on that like Goldilocks number. But truly, it came out of the ether from someone who I really admire. That's how it started. I didn't like read that somewhere, or that didn't even come from resource generation. That was just from her. And it's a nice round number.
Yes, very true. And I think part of this is like, how do we also factor in the power that we still have as people with wealth and class privilege? But how did you determine where to move that money to? And how do you think about that power dynamic?
I mean, that's where resource generation really really changed my perspective. The education that I received around the ethos of giving away with no strings attached and giving away to individuals and to grassroots organizations and to mutual aid. Um, I was just not aware of that growing up. I don't even know what my perspective was on it. I probably had a very like neoliberal, like, oh, if you give people money, that like better to teach a man to fish, blah blah blah. I mean, honestly, living through my early 20s in the gig economy and in the service industry and very much needing money, I just needed money. That's what I needed. Uh, Living through that, the light version, of course, because I had family support that I knew I could draw on in emergencies. I was never actually out there on my own, but really feeling into that like money was the thing that would change my life, not skills or some nebulous organization that people are donating money to that is supposedly supposed to help me. It's like direct money. Having that lived experience and thinking more critically about the systems around philanthropy and charity, how money gets trapped in supposedly charitable organizations that are ultimately another form of industry. Thinking more critically and learning more about that really helped me understand where to give money to. And what was the second part of the question around where
Think
did you...
about the power dynamic.
Oh, yes. That part of it actually, I think because I was giving away not large sums of money, that part was not as hard for me to move through. Like giving away $100, no strings attached, just like, here's money, felt not difficult to do, even though $100 was a lot for me at various times in my life. Conceptually, I knew that like that amount of money is not like a lot in the grand scheme of people redistributing wealth. So that part, I think because I was starting relatively small, that part didn't feel difficult to move through. And also when I envision the world that we are working towards, like an interdependent world where power dynamics have shifted and things are different than how they are now. I want the power to shift. That's the goal. And so giving away money to people within my zone of discomfort but learning actually did not feel as scary as I thought it would feel. I think, too, also that lived experience of knowing that feeling of money is the thing I need. I know what to do with this money. Please just give me money. I just need money. I don't need all these bells and whistles and all these strings and bureaucracy and paperwork and all of that. Truly, I carry that feeling with me all the time. That informs my ability to move through whatever discomfort is there around those power dynamics.
I really love the future that you're painting. And yeah, and one where people with wealth don't get to make all the decisions on where the money moves, but that it really is flowing all over the different ecosystems that we're a part of. And I know we already covered a lot, so I just want to make space for any other things you'd like to share with listeners before we wrap up. Phrased a different way, if you could wave a magic wand, what do you wish that people listening to the show already knew about?
I wish that I could give away this feeling of not being afraid that people are coming for what you have. It's something that I felt when I was in RG spaces or just after joining RG, and then I would be around high net wealth spaces again, having gained that perspective. I suddenly understood. Growing up, I never understood how rich people could be afraid of anything. I was like, but you have money. Why are you afraid? And then I started understanding, oh, they're afraid they're going to lose money because people are going to take more and more from them. Something that I feel like I bring to these spaces is this trust that they're not, having needed money in my life and just needed enough money for me and knowing what to do with the money once I had it. I wish I could impart this feeling to people of people are not coming for your life. Poor people, low income people are not trying to take what is yours. Or I'm saying this clumsily, but people people just want to have enough to live, and you don't have to be afraid that if you start to give that you will lose everything. It ties into what we were talking about with money is not safety and we're building a different world, but it really is this very like visceral feeling that I know is different in people who grew up in like a lot of wealth, that there's this like real fear that if you start to give away, people will just take and take and take, and then you'll lose everything. I wish I could like wave a magic wand and impart this like feeling that I have that's not true. And I think if more people felt that in their bodies, they would give more away. That's like one thing. And then some other kind of smaller bits that I wrote down that I wanted to like just say, which is you can move deliberately, make systems, and not do everything at once. Like you don't have to feel emotionally attached to this work all the time to continue to do it. You can for a while set it and forget it until you feel okay to come back to it. I've been coming in and out of that this whole time that I've been a part of this work, that I'm going to put the system in place. I'm going to emotionally engage with it. And then this system exists for me within my own financial life. The system, I built this for myself so that I don't have to be like activated about it all the time. I don't have to, the aforementioned ADHD. I will forget about things if I'm not paying attention to them or if there is like a system in place. So you can move deliberately, make a system for yourself, emotionally engage with that system, and then take a beat, rest, come back to it. This is harm reduction. This is not perfection. We do not have to like do this work perfectly all at once. You can start small and escalate, and before you know it, you're giving away more than you ever thought you would, but it's not going to feel like you are losing your entire sense of self. It's going to feel good. So that is one
Yeah.
thing. And then the last thing is the phrase community investment. I talk about this everywhere I go, but and Jordan, I'm sure that you've talked about this on the podcast at some point, but you are the biggest reason why I know this phrase. I wish that everyone knew that there's like another way to invest. There are ways to use money, and even in the models that we understand around, like, I'm going to invest in this thing, I'm going to put my money here, in ways that are creating the world that we want, and in ways that are non-extractive, but still exist in the framework that we can understand. And community investment is one of those things. I just wish everyone knew about it and did it.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Natalie. I really appreciate that. I also wish that more people knew about community investment. And I think people are familiar with like impact investments, but impact investments can be so impact washed. Like, why are we trying to make financial return equal to social impact? Like, make that make sense to me. And just to kind of like pull on a few threads that you lifted up, this idea that if we make ourselves known, or if we start engaging in the act of being in solidarity with working class or poor folks or BIPOC folks or indigenous lands, like you can name so many other identities and groups and organizations, that will be cast aside, or that we will have to put ourselves at the very bottom of the priority list. It's like, actually, you can have agency. I think a part of like this fear comes from the fact that our government has scapegoated poor and working class people, primarily BIPOC people, primarily queer, trans, and femme people, and immigrants as well, as the reasons for why people don't have enough, for why people are struggling. And obviously that's not true, and that's a way to divide us. So just really want to keep reiterating that like the system is making it so that we feel those things. And yeah, go ahead.
And that's the framework that colonizers bring. Like, colonizers took everything. Colonizers killed everyone. Colonizers stole labor and land from people. Like, that is the mindset. That wasn't people who have been marginalized in this country. That's not something that they invented. That is something that colonizers invented. So when you are afraid of just being annihilated and people coming and taking everything, like, remember that that is what the colonizers did. That is not a thing that the marginalized did. That mindset is not inherent to this work.
Yeah, I'll just keep riffing on it with you if that feels good. Yeah, it like brings up the question for me of like who benefits from the belief that if we support each other or stand in solidarity with each other, like only those in power, only the system that we're living in benefits from that. If we're divided and thinking about our individual selves or our individual nuclear family units, like there's no world in which anyone else benefits from that, including ourselves. Like we become fearful, lonely, isolated, all the things. Anything else that you want to add to that?
That really sums it up, that there's always remember who benefits from your fear. And it's always people who have historically been in power. And the narrative around wealth and power is you are all the fear and all the dynamics and all of the stories about it have been told to you by the people who have historically been in power. So when you are thinking about giving money away and you're like, but what are they going to do with it? Or they're just going to keep asking me for more. All of those, I mean, there's so many others. Just think back to who told you those stories and why. And even if that doesn't like fix it in your mind or like completely dissuade or assuage your fears, I think it is a really important first step to just remember, like you were saying, what systems are wanting to be held in place. Not even just individuals. This is all systemic. It's not like one person is sitting somewhere in like a Mr. Burns style office saying, I'm evil, I'm masterminding this. It's the system, the organism wants to live on. And so remembering that the system wants to keep living in the way that it is living. And so remembering who told you those stories and why in order to maintain that system helps. It certainly helps me move through that fear.
Oh, what a good place to end it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for holding the space and for bringing these stories out into the world. I think it's really fucking cool. I'm so excited for it to reach like the right person. I know that they're out there and it is like gonna spark something fucking awesome. So
yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth, and thank you so much for tuning in.